you basically take some tomatoes, you put those in the pan, you fry them, you get bacon, you have eggs, sunny side up of course, although we don't talk about it like that. But and then we have maybe then some blood pudding or black pudding as it's called.
That's what did it for me.
And you're all going to eat it in about half an hour. And then scatter to the four winds as everyone has another gastrointestinal event. Okay. A couple of things about, when somebody like me comes to a group like this and starts droning on about all my experience, this is probably one of the most tedious things I can do. But what I want to do is just position the Crispian Advantage. It comes from one of the most famous passages of English literature. It's from Henry V, part 4, and it's basically the battle before the Battle of Agincourt. The Battle of Agincourt was like this. You are wet, you are tired, you are suffering from disease, and you want to go home desperately. You're in wet France. France can get really wet. And in front of you are these knights, and they've got all the latest equipment. You know, the armor, the horses have got armor and everything else, and you have to gird your loins, otherwise you're going to die. And so this is Shakespeare's version of what Henry must have said before the Battle of Agincourt. The critical thing for this morning is, we few, we happy few, we band of brothers. Because today it is not dramatic to say that today people's translating change into bottom line results has become a tough proposition. Today's challenge is committing more effort to succeed with less resources. It isn't going to change. That dynamic is not going to change. It's about as much about conviction as it is skill. People probably in business education here will be familiar with the concept of emotional intelligence, and I'll talk about that later. But more and more, it depends on emotional intelligence. How many jobs are your students going to go through in their lifetime, in their working careers? I think that the current estimate's 10. So the ability to get on with people quickly in a clinical setting as much as in a steel fabrication shop is a really important meta skill, a life skill for your students. So if you take nothing away from this session, take the concepts of alignment and help your students understand them. Because when I worked with, for example, Brigham Young University in Idaho, in 2 hours I had people saying, I now understand why I don't get on with my wife. I'm also a divorce lawyer as well. But, you know, I now understand why my flatmate gets angry with me. So this is a very basic skill. So take that away. And one of the things about this is about leading people. Leading people today is the leader as servant. Now, if you come from a faith tradition, the leader as servant and the washing of feet and those sorts of things will be familiar to you. If it isn't, there is some great merit in looking at the military history about the great leaders and how they were servants to their people. And that's the only way we're going to make change work in North America. Because right now we have a problem. Have a real problem with change. Getting people on the same page today has never been more difficult. So I'm going to be focusing on what do we mean by misalignment and how does it contribute to failed change. We have to grasp this. This is one of the most significant problems. How many people in this room have relatives who work in a family business?
Used to, but don't anymore.
Pardon?
Used to, but all have retired.
But you know the business. Family businesses, right? Two brothers, a sister and a brother taking over a farm or whatever, and they fall out. right? And that's what I'll be talking about with the people, the business community. So many people are family business owners. This applies to you going into business with your brother, mother, whatever relative, as much as it does about a hospital or a large retail outfit or this college. What happens when people are misaligned? This is not just a nice piece of soft skills training. This is really important because things really go badly wrong. So we really need to understand alignment. We need to be able to articulate it because it's not just about communication. The words that are really not very useful in our language today are communication, interactive skills, how we deal with people. It doesn't really touch the sides, does it? In terms of why you can't stand the sight of another person, or why you just get this sense that they don't get it. Or you have this feeling like, well, I'll keep guessing as what I'm supposed to be doing. We've all had that feeling. It's a very human thing. And what I want to do today is to get us started. This is a starting session. This isn't a finish session, as you'll see. So how do we get aligned? So let's get practical, and that's where I'm going to spend most of my time. And what are the benefits to you? So you're going to be working together. So I'm assuming, are you all sitting next to a colleague in the same discipline or department at the moment? Are you all more or less? Could you do that, please? Because I think it'll be useful. So move next to people who you work with in your discipline, in nursing or surgery. Richard's got an interesting alignment problem. He doesn't know who he's sitting with. Richard also believes that it's not relevant because she's part-time.
Oh, now don't make an example of me.
Oh, I pick on people all the time. You just happen to be first, so we might as well get it out of the way. Interesting issue here. Ken and I don't make any distinction between part-time or adjuncts or whatever you call yourself. You're the team, right? And we need to be aligned on certain things. Right? So bear that in mind as we go. Okay. A couple of things about the background and why I'm so passionate about what I do and why I'm spending a week here. Okay. 60% of change initiatives in North America fail. Now, you can go to Harvard, KPMG, McKinsey, Blanchard. The list is endless of the surveys since 1996 that give that statistic. That is a conservative. Some people go as high as 80%. No wonder our economy's got a problem. Actually, the Western world has a problem because these statistics are just as applicable in England as they are here. And in Germany, of course, they're worse. But never mind, that was a joke. Don't mention the war. Anyway, about Monty Python and things like that. And what are those Messerschmitts? Those Messerschmitts aren't Messerschmitts, they're Fokkers. Is that how you pronounce it? Here's a summation of 10 years of work in alignment. And this is where we look to Ken as well as one of the leaders of the college. Is 70% of the leaders' expectations are not understood by their people. This is consistently, I can go into a lot of detail, and one of the things I've got here is a box of business cards for the reason that you can go on the blog and you can read about anything that interests you. Because a lot of what I'm saying... Hello?
I'm going to interrupt you.
Yeah.
As long as I have to stay, you're going to have to put up with me.
Okay.
I'm still mulling around in my head, what exactly do you mean by alignment?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't actually define it, I don't think,
No,
when you ran down your little list.
Good pick up.
Before I go, I got to know what it is.
Being aligned is that your expectations of another person actually match with what they think you expect of them.
So it's very much that kind of idea that within any kind of conversation, there are 6 people present. There's what you think of me, what I think of you.
No. Not think of. That's a different issue.
Okay.
And part of this piece that I'm going to do, Tricia, is to separate out some of those tricky issues. Because what you expect of somebody and what you think of them tend to be two different things. We don't always work with people we like, but we have to work with them. So that is, I'm going to put a placeholder there for Tricia, because I'm going to go into what is alignment on my track this morning. So thanks for the pickup. Okay, so
I'm going to just say something. I'm Tricia.
you're Tricia.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I mix up in my
She's
name?
Carol.
Carol.
Carol Erickson.
Names as well. It's alignment.
Yeah, we didn't do the name thing. I missed that. So if you guys want to do that, we can. But
We will pick it up as we go along.
already missed
But
it.
thank you.
That's all right.
Okay, so we've got a problem. Today the change is a bit like this, right? Don't you feel that, you know? So the dean's saying there's this thing equip, and you're going, oh, more coming down the pipe. Actually, there's a survey which says that 43% of Americans today are cynical about what people tell them. That's before even you've got to work with them. I mean, just look at the current presidential campaign. I mean, I don't know about you, but and this isn't a partisan point, you just put it on mute or you switch channels, don't you? Here we go again, right? So we're working in a climate which is changing quite quickly, but it does mean that change is very much more difficult. Because people are going, oh no, here we go, more with less. Costs. These are just some of the statistics. I'm not going to go into them in detail. You can read. But if you go, there's actually a website now called The Cost of IT Project Failure. And it tracks IT projects particularly, and how they failed and how much it costs. So this is a really big expense for us. And it's not likely to get any better, unfortunately. Is everyone familiar with, I presume, IBM, but KPMG? Have you heard of that before? It's a very large consulting firm, many thousands of people. I think it was originally Pete Marwick McClintock, and they turned it around to KPMG for some reason. But Ernst & Young, Mercer, and these are the big consulting houses that are global. They do very big surveys. And 70% of their executives say it's increasing in complexity. The other thing is, this is the real kicker. Complexity is a real funny thing, and it's making the ability to be aligned and to do things purposefully in the time and resources required very difficult. It's not getting any easier, and this college is not immune to it, because you have things like open source learning, right? There's people writing about de-schooling. There's all this learning network and all the things that are coming over the transom that have to be considered. You know, what is my role in the classroom? Is the classroom a relevant concept anymore? And there are people that are questioning that today. You know, when you prepare a training session, instructional session, or whatever it might be, why aren't we using some session that's been designed somewhere else? You know, it poses all sorts of questions, and it's the complexity that you're facing today, and it's why I'm here today to help Ken kick off the year, to start really talking about these issues. Because complexity is really knotting people up. But there's one thing that's hopeful for us. You don't need complex solutions to solve complex problems. One way of doing it, and there are others, is that people understand the mission intent. They really do understand what we're trying to do here for the next 12 months or the next academic year, and you really understand what your role is. And you really understand where you can get help from and how you're going to work together. And Ken's going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But this is not about writing more job descriptions. This is not about taking on more IT systems. This is not about, it's about how we work with what we have in a more effective way. And if we don't take the stress out of doing that, it won't happen. So people are resistant to change very often because they are uncertain, they are doubtful. They don't know how they fit in. And that is never going to work if you're looking for successful change. If people feel stresses and they feel they can't talk about them as they apply to them, then we've got problems. Signs of we're now going to go into what is misalignment. And firstly, what is misalignment? What is misaligned expectations? Well, here's some examples. Now I'm going to ask you to put your hand up and identify which individuals have created that for you. I'm tense.
I'm going to leave now.
We've waited there.
It's John.
That's the problem. It's destructive in a number of ways, not least of which is it builds cynicism in an organisation and a culture, and people then start returning to their little silos and they start putting bricks on top of their silos just to make it higher, you know? Because of the stress they go through. This is stressful, right? And of course, alignment, which is coming into more answering the question, what is alignment? Alignment is not just about tasks and actions. You know, if I say to somebody, okay, Deb, would you get the donuts for 8 o'clock on Monday before we start the staff meeting, or whatever it is? You know, that's a task. And Deb can say, yeah, I'll do that, and we're off to the races. But are we? You know, all the people sitting around this room have self-interest. That's one of the things that, you know, you have to have a clear idea of what you're trying to do, why you're here, and all that sort of stuff. And some alignment has to say, well, how does your self-interest and mine coincide, or what pieces can we help each other with, you know? We can also have a lot of experience has got to be brought to bear. There's nothing worse than being in a team when somebody rattles on and you're trying to say, well, I've actually done that before. And that's one simple example of how people can feel devalued. Their experience is not taken into account, is not referred to, is not respected. That's another way of getting misalignment to happen, right? And there's values and beliefs. You know, I've lived in Michigan before. Second most churched city in North America is Grand Rapids, which is where I've spent a lot of time, and therefore, quite typically, management meetings would start with a prayer. I now live in an LDS area, you know, Mormon area. Different again, right? And that's just one simple area where we can say people have values and beliefs and we have to respect them, you know, whether they have a turban or not. You know, that was tragic. You know, just I've lived in Sikh communities and they're great people. But we've all got values and beliefs which really touch us. They are very important to us, and if we're not aligned about it, and we feel uncomfortable about what's being decided that's not related to our values and beliefs, we are not going to be committed. So when you look at this dynamic of being misaligned and why this session is so important to kick off your year, it's when we don't feel aligned, we don't trust, right? Is that true? When somebody's not taking account of our interests, our experience, our values, our beliefs, are you going to trust that person as much? It's not likely you do. The problem is it leads to something else. And that's a fear of conflict. Because you don't trust, you've got to, in any group, you've got to confront issues, right? We're going to have disagreements, right? And it's healthy. It's really healthy to say, I disagree, we've got a different way of doing things, and whatever. But as long as we keep it about the issues and the idea, we can work something out and we'll come to something that means something. But if we don't, of course, it leads to then lack of commitment. We're getting disengagement happening to a greater degree. Then, of course, we avoid accountability because we don't want to expose ourselves and we don't want to make any commitments we don't want to keep. And therefore, we're not particularly interested in the results of what this endeavour is. For reference, that's Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, if you want to look at more about that. It's very good work on how a team can gradually destroy itself.
But
So what's not...
doesn't trust,
I'm sorry, say again, please.
I understood you to say that misalignment leads to lack of trust, but doesn't lack of trust based on experience lead to misalignment?
Those 5 things will lead to, contribute to misalignment. Yes, you're right. But was that your question?
No, what I'm saying is if there isn't trust, regardless of alignment or not,
Right.
you're not going to be aligned.
Yeah, that's the other, the kicker for it. If you're working in a culture where trust is not there anyway, trying to get aligned is going to be even more difficult. I certainly agree with that, yeah. Did you have a question?
I was just agreeing.
Oh, good. I like people who agree with me. Actually, I don't. I like people who sort of disagree with me, but that's another story. But, you know, what's not being talked about? Because you can't have solid alignment unless people are saying, you know what, there's an 800-pound gorilla in this room and we have to talk about it. Because I'm going home unhappy, and, you know, ... fill in the blanks as a result of you going home from work here, being unhappy, what happens, right? And of course, we've got to ask ourselves, and this is the context question that we're asking, is about if there's no trust to start with, there are certain things that you can't align because there's not enough trust to actually get started, which I think is the point that you're making. There's a context to that. But certainly, much like where I live, you have pothole season, yeah?
Season.
All 4 seasons.
It's an all-season event.
They don't get patching lower really isn't going to do it, and people have regular debates about why the airport road in Blackfoot is not being repaired while they're doing something else somewhere else, and it's normally an elected official lives down a particular lane and they get done first, right? It's curiosity to me because I come from the lower peninsula, so I'm a flatlander, right? Or is it a fudge sucker? I'm never quite sure. Anyway, Upers. But the further north you go towards the Mackinac Bridge, the better the roads. I never really figured that one out. But anyway, you can't ignore them. They are going to get worse. They are going to get in the culture. So even if you have a little bit of trust to start with, right? It's going to get worse if you don't mend these things. Okay, so now we're on to what is alignment, and let's have a look at an example. This is actually based on real data, and I'm not going to go into detail now because just for time's sake. Tom had expectations of Cliff. Oh, by the way, this was a $680 million hospital project in Sacramento. Nothing too important, but at this time they had burnt $22 million of their contingency, and they only had a budget of $29 million, and they hadn't even started building the 3rd hospital yet. Tom had expectations of Cliff. He had 13 expectations related to improving the situation, and Cliff thought he had 12. Pretty close, right? Unfortunately, not aligned. So alignment is two-way. We are in alignment when my expectations of you match with what you think I expect of you. And that's half the story. The other half is you have expectations of me that should match with what I think you expect of me. If that is true for some issues in our relationship when we're trying to reach our goals in 2012, 2013, then we stand a good chance of making progress. Of course, the problem is that doing it with two people we can do on relatively simply. 4, 8, 20. So let me ask you this. How many people are in this room? 40? Ken said there would be about 40 here, right? So
35. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
There's 35 I counted.
35. Okay, so we've got a little bit less of a problem than when we started, but...
People didn't show up, so that's part of the problem.
Okay, so 40 is a good working number then, that's what you said. Okay, so we have 40 people with 40 others to connect with, less the alignment with themselves, and so you get 560 alignment lines, and of course, because it's a two-way thing, you divide by 2 to say you have 780 relationships in this room. Potentially. Now, should you have 780 relationships with everybody, probably not going to be very efficient. But it does call into question of who should I have alignment with, and I'll make the distinction now. The fact that Cheryl or Tricia and I have a relationship, we go for coffee or we share an interest in music or whatever, yes, we have a relationship which is social. And we could even be good friends. But I've known good friends to be really misaligned when they're trying to do a work task or get a work thing done. So I want you to just divorce from the fact that you have people in this room that you have relationships with just because you're in the community and you know people. That's different from what I'm talking about, which is how do we align and have relationships that are purposeful to what we're trying to achieve this year. Okay, questions. First thing is, what alignment areas do we need to focus on this year? There are lots of things that we're doing at the moment that we want you to continue doing. You will continue doing it. That's great. Okay, that's why the college is as successful as it is, why it's survived as long. That's great. What we're talking about is going to the next level, which is about how do we improve, how do we remain agile to respond to all the things that are going on that we need to respond to. What relationships need to be full-bodied? So if we're taking Cheryl as an example, a full-bodied relationship would be, I've got 50 expectations of you, you think I have 50, and you probably have 40 in return back to me, and I think you have 40. That's a full-bodied relationship. It's very important that we have a good full-bodied relationship. There are relationships that don't exist today that probably need to. And that would be 0, 0, 0, 0. And you wouldn't believe how many times when you're trying to bring about a change, you suddenly find two people who you want to really work together, and they don't have any expectations of each other, and they don't think the other party has any expectations of them. And really important gateways of communication suddenly don't exist at a point when you're trying to do something like change strategy or react to competition or whatever it might be. Whatever the pressure is to change, you suddenly find you don't have relationships on the issues that are important to the change. The other thing is imbalance. This is where the stress will come in, where I have expectations of Larry, you know, I have 15 expectations of him, and he has not a clue. So I walk into his office on Monday morning and say, okay, where is it? And he goes, what? What's what? No, you've never had that experience before, have you? Two people looking down at their pads going, I don't know what to do. But really does create a lot of stress when you get this sense that somebody's expecting something and they don't tell you about it. That's the funny thing. You have to be a mind reader. Fill in the blank. I'm sure you can. Right. So let's have a look at an alignment process. We're now going to get into some work, because first thing is the mission and strategy, which Ken might want to refer to in a minute about for this year. But certainly we've got the key players in the room. There's no Dobby off ground here. You're it. If you know that game, this game. We are now going to develop strategic components. Whoopee! I'm going home, right? Components are the essence of alignment. There are all sorts of relationships in this room that are great, things continue, but there are certain things we need to make sure we're aligned on. They're components, and they can't be more than 9 in number. Why? Because I said so. But no, there's some good rationale that we're trying to produce focus, so we don't want a lot of issues to try and realign, establish alignment, verify alignment on, because we've all got work to do, and we're trying not to add things, we're trying to take things away, and then add new stuff. So we're going to introduce the process. We're going to start this. Step 5 will be kicked off today, and then Ken and I are going to talk about how we continue it during the academic year. But certainly at some point we're going to look at prioritization on where our biggest alignment, misalignment areas are. So for example, there's a group of architects and a group of design engineers. And the construction engineers, they're the people, mechanical engineers who design the structural steel for a building. They wanted to have all the changes to plans on paper. If you've been in an engineering office, this means you have very large pieces of paper. You have rolls of these things that if you drop them on your foot, you could have a real serious injury. I'm not joking. If you ever try and lift one of these things on these big construction projects. But in the meantime, the people, the architects, wanted their approval. They had to have the sign off, and they said, "Can you do electronic? Can you do that electronically, please?" And they said, "Oh, no, 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 no." The reason is, of course, as many of you may know, engineers have to sign off, and that's a responsibility legally that they've approved the drawing. Anyway, so we got down to saying, okay, we need a session. So we got all the architects in the room that were related to this project. We got all the structural engineers, and we negotiated 80% of the drawings could be submitted electronically. Therefore, we could have faster turnaround. So that's what that prioritization means. We find that there's an area where we don't agree. Great. Now we're going to sit down and work something out to make sure that the project, the strategy, whatever we're trying to do works more effectively. And during that time, when we've got that prioritization, the alignment process will then start to gather momentum. And we might be using briefing, training, coaching, whatever rapid improvement cycles we can have, because all the time we're looking at those things that are TBD. In other words, there's an expectation I have of Ryan, for example, which Ryan and I haven't had a chance to talk about. That's a TBD. And it may be Ryan says, well, you might think that you want that to do that, but it's not relevant. We take it off the table. We discard it. Or we actually complete it. We come to agreement. It's very easily resolved. Take it off the table. So now we are left with a residue of unresolved expectations. So in a steel fabrication plant where we're trying to get the owner to move over to run other businesses in the family portfolio, we were left with 30 at the end of a 14-week period. And we had a one-day meeting, and we went through all those 30 issues, and we resolved them all. That's the benefit of it, right? So that's the track that we're going to be following over the year. And this is the start of it. Now, the first thing to do is to decide the components. And they are entirely up to you and Mr. Trasker.
Hi.
So Mr. Trasker is now going to talk about his components, the things that he would like better alignment on, or establish alignment for something new. And then I'm going to ask the group to say what are the other, possibly up to 6 other areas of alignment we need. Ken?
So the first one, and these aren't, I should frame this as well, these aren't negative things. These are things that I've observed, things that I think I could also be improving around. Collaboration is one component. Obviously there's a lot of pieces to that, which Nick will drive into. I think we need to be better aligned around how we collaborate. One of the reasons I chose that is because that emerged as one of the areas in Atlanta that the Sequin team identified and had an amazing discussion around that. You know, division to division, student services, faculty, instruction, student services, advising. And so there are, the relationships under that are, quite frankly, present lots of opportunities. The other area that I feel we could be better aligned in is improvement. So, I'm sorry? Oh, you can't read that, Nick. It's probably not a good marker. If you need new markers, we can get some of those. Yeah. So a component of improvement, and that's general, but improvement. We need to be better aligned in how we improve. So if one person is here, you know, they're just taking the lead on things, but the rest of us are not there, how do we better align that? So, and the other two, I don't know. Nick asked me for 4, and I tell you, with
No, I didn't. I asked you for 3.
he asked me for 4. Okay. I was unconscious most of yesterday, so you could be right. But trust and risk. I think we could be better aligned on trust in terms of what we define as trust, and then also in how we approach risk. I think there's various levels of appreciation for the idea of risk. You know, I may be willing to take a risk, but you know, someone else may not. Someone else might say, "Hey, Ken, I've got an idea that's risky," and I may say, "Well, I don't understand enough about it for me to say I agree with you on that risk." So those are the 4 I've come up with. Being a student, and
it's interesting. He's making a distinction between trust and risk being separate issues.
mm-hmm.
That's interesting. Not.
But I'm the most interesting person in this room.
Ken is
So.
seeing trust and risk differently. It immediately poses the next question: is how do you distinguish the two? Because they're very closely related, and that is not a problem. That's just a question of opening discussion about what we're trying to align on. That's very valuable to do that. And I saw somebody's hand come up.
Serena.
Yeah, I trusted that we were going to get a break.
Yeah, we are. Thank you.
I said.
She is.
Question: why?
That was definitely one of my expectations, too.
So a break. So, you know, food is here. So Nick.
So hang on a second
Okay.
before you take over the session. What I would like to do now is to say, you've got to control things, and it's right. Otherwise we'd have a bun fight or whatever. But anyway, those are Ken's 4. What I'd like you to do over the break is start to think about what are the other areas of alignment. And to do that, I just want to show you a couple of examples to send you on your way. I just put these up as examples, by the way, because they have to be from this group. I can't define what they are, because that's not healthy. But here's 5 that came off a construction project, and I chose it deliberately because it's completely different from your environment. But it's quite interesting how they go from very hard number things like finances, and they go through respectful communication. So here's some examples of what a component looks like. What I'd like to do in, how long do we take for a break here?
What do you
5, 10
think?
minutes?
10 minutes?
10, okay.
15? Okay, 10 minutes.
So let's come back at 10:15, and the first thing I'm going to say is, okay, from your group, so this is why you're sitting with people you work with, is what are the other issues we need to be aligned on? And it's okay to come back and ask me questions to get clarity or whatever. This is an important discussion to have, because out of all the communication that goes on, we're trying to pick some things to focus on that will deliver better results for us, okay? So thanks. Let's be back at 10:15. I thought people in the UP were known for their straightforwardness. You know. But anyway, there you go. Some people are polite after all. But the important thing here is that work with BYU, one of the most powerful things we did was to get the communication students in the same room as their professor, Brent Vineyard. And at the end of it, Brent stood up, and I give him all credit for this. He stood up and said, you know what? I have not been making myself clear enough about what I expected you. And he said the most important thing for me was, and I'm not clear on what you expected me either. And that, you felt the room just warm up, and you got that sense of, you know, oh, we're really going to do something great. And it really did help people. So, but it goes back, Larry, to my point about this is a meta skill. This is a life skill which I firmly believe students need, because there is so much more attention to working in small groups, distributed decision making. Everything is about the individual using more sense of responsibility and authority, and it will continue. Technology alone will do that, right? It will just continue to reduce, flatten hierarchies, and therefore relationships and emotional intelligence become even more important. I'll get off my soapbox, but anyway, something I firmly believe is very important for students. So thank you for that pickup, Larry. Okay, so we currently have 3 or 4 from Ken, collaboration, improvement, trust and risk. Will you please congregate in your groups, and I would like you to come up with one thing that you think we need to be better aligned on, and this can include between departments, in departments, it's omnidirectional. It could be for Ken, it could be for your departmental head, it doesn't really matter. But is there an area for this year that we need to be better aligned on? What I'd like to do is come up with a title for it, and maybe one person actually stands up and says, I'm representing my colleague, and this is what we think is important. And it will be a word picture that looks like this, okay? You hear going wrong at the moment and what you would like to happen so that people understand where you're coming from on this component?
What were we saying, April?
We're talking about communicating that there's a new chair in the department, letting faculty and full-time and part-time faculty know that, as well as expectations for course outcomes, making sure that's somewhat consistent, and clearly communicated among the division. Okay. Probably consistent and accurate on a regular basis, making sure that communication is reinforced a bit, because things change quickly, and make sure
we've got consistency and accuracy. It sounds like, has anyone heard of a briefing cascade before? Have you heard the term briefing cascade? In large warehouse operations, for example, when you've got multiple shifts and multiple locations, and you want to get a message down to everybody very quickly, the manager of the warehouse will talk to the supervisors to the charge hands, and the charge hands will read the shift coming in with the latest information. That's called a briefing cascade, and it has requirements like the message must get personally to every person in the division within 24 working hours. And that was for 3,800 full-time equivalents.
And do they all end up with the same message?
Well, Napoleon had a very good way of testing it out, and he used a similar idea, which is, having briefed his generals, he'd then walk down the line of soldiers and go, what are we doing today? And if the message wasn't the same, he wasn't going to play Chinese whispers. He'd find out why the briefing cascade had broken down. So if you expect something, you have to inspect it. So that's very important. Thank you for that. That definition is going to be worked on, but it's an area where we probably need to do some work. Another one, please.
We were talking about having a true recognition and respect for what the primary duties are of the staff member versus instructor versus administrator, like where the primary energies ought to be, because administrators expect, the faculty, for example, to be more linked in to committees and this and that, and that's great, and we need to be invested, but they also need to know where our energies are.
Right.
And that expectation has to be defined.
Okay. If you were to give this component a name, what would you call it? Okay, that's good. No, it's good in the sense that
Energy consciousness.
I like it. You know?
Energy exploitation.
It's a good point.
To do with focus.
Focus. I thought she's whistling and her lips aren't moving. I thought it was amazing. So we've got something about focus. I hear something about, what's your name again?
Amanda.
Amanda. I hear something about role
Right.
in the context of respect. I hear that. And then it's sort of like, it's back to what Gerald said, it's sort of like an energy balance really, isn't it? It's respecting where the different energy is going. So that's useful. Okay. So that's an area we obviously need to do some work on, but again, the important thing is to hear a colleague trying to express something and say, I don't quite know. That's a great invitation to say, how can I help you define that? Because it's obviously important to your colleagues and yourself. Next one.
We concentrated this more on how it relates to the classroom, and in dealing with retention, that I think we do a really good job of communicating our expectations to our students through our syllabi,
Right.
that introduction, but that doesn't necessarily come back to what the students expect from us. We talk about how different strategies to improve that communication back to us right from the beginning of class, how we would improve on having students communicate to us their expectations of us as instructors.
Right.
And so that we know that we know that the students know our expectations of them, but we know what their expectations of us are.
Okay.
We don't necessarily know that.
The words that come into my mind, and I don't want to put words in your mind, Jim, in your mouth, is student alignment.
Yeah, student alignment related to retention, to improve retention.
To improve retention. Okay. This picks up on what Larry was saying about the importance of working with students on this subject as well as with colleagues. And the value here is retention. Okay, cool. Another one.
We actually had two. One of them dealt with communication and kind of, I think, to come off of that one would be alignment of courses, especially with off-campus. You know, that communication with off-campus instructors as well. So towards aligning our courses for the betterment of the student. So what we say is happening in all of them. So we had that one. And the other one was kind of the collaboration up there and like getting so the collaboration with the having the people involved who need to be involved. For example, apparently there's a new facility being purchased in Houghton. We need labs up there really bad. We have not been asked what they should needs to be included in those, and we've been like talking about it for a long time. So the again, related to the off-campus, it's not just the courses, it's the facilities as well, everything up there. Yeah, the infrastructure part of it.
And communication between the instructors, part-time instructors, and adjuncts as well, I think is important.
Is that an additional component? I'm sorry, what was your name, please?
Serena.
Serena.
All adjuncts, we were talking about off-campus and on-campus.
You include off-campus and
Off-campus
adjuncts together. Okay. The reason I put that in, Serena, is because you don't want to be involved in all the minutiae, but it sounds like you're having a sense of misalignment with a big decision. So obviously the issue is what do we mean by big, but it's certainly a distinction that sounds as though you would find it useful to work with.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely big because it affects so many things down.
Right.
Whether we can run classes up there, even if they have what they need, all the stuff.
It's got a lot of ramifications if you have new space and things like that. Okay, another one.
Back to the math and science division, we actually did think of a way that would help with communication. We do have the minutes posted on our website, but we don't always look at them. And at staff meetings, if we had a briefing cascade from each standing committee, even if they had nothing to report for that month, they could say no report, so we would have more up to date. And if something was catching our interest, we would then go refer to the minutes, because sometimes we don't have time to read the minutes from every single committee.
There's something about a verbal briefing that your team's finding valuable. What we need to quantify is what and when, by the sound of it.
We sort of got into the staff meetings when the whole college is closed to those
Right.
meetings.
Okay. So what and when and who needs to be fleshed out, but that's having a verbal briefing. One of my favourite expectations of a project manager to a design engineer was, if you find you can't meet your commitment, don't email me, and this is a quote, pick up the damn phone. So alignment is a really practical thing. So you might be sitting there just thinking, well, I'll let you know at the next meeting that I'm going to be 3 days late. Well, that was very important to have. And getting through to some of these people who are living in their own world, designing things, you know, la 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 la. And she's trying to coordinate resources. So pick up the damn phone, which is the briefing element. But verbal communication is not lost. There's a great convenience, but since when was convenience effective? By using email all the time. Talking of my presentation next tomorrow. Okay, another one.
We were talking about integrated teamwork within our department because of the growth.
Yeah.
A lot of times there's not even time to get together, so
Right.
integrated teamwork within our department for on-campus and off-campus. That is our other full-time faculty member on the TV screen. We started making the conversation on our break before we even went down there to talk to her. And then we kind of thought, we better go talk with Lisa. So off-campus is a big thing, and sometimes we think of them after, when we really should be thinking of them right with the rest of the group. Also, outside of our department and our division, we think that we should be having that integrated teamwork system-wide.
Yeah, the great thing about communication, particularly in a college like this, is it is omnidirectional. If you've ever had certain types of microphones, some microphones pick up everything. As some politicians have found out. But omnidirectional means that communication flows in all sorts of different directions. It's not top-down, it's not on-campus, off-campus. There's genuinely looking for where we need alignment. Okay. Any others?
I'm in the CAD department and the applied technology division. We discussed that we feel we already have good communication amongst both departments and the division, but perhaps looking at improvement, we found that perhaps we can better, I guess, align ourselves with the students and see how we can get them all there when we need to, both on time and master the content area, and also support. We do support each other, I guess, ongoing. That perhaps we can still improve that, and also to communicate why the students may be taking a class within a whole program. Such as somebody mentioned, why do we need an English class in auto or something to that effect. So to really communicate that so that they really understand the whole principle underlies the actual application of it all.
Okay.
Improvement in the class.
Okay. I'm sorry, what was your name? Anne, you seem to be, part of what you've just said is about student alignment.
Yeah.
So things like turning up on time would be what I would say is being aligned. There's another element, though, which is students appreciating why they need English when they're doing a welding course, for example. Does that fall within student alignment, or is that separate in your colleagues' minds?
With their expectations.
Well, I think a lot of times you get the students where they actually ask you that question, why am I taking an English course?
I understand, yeah.
I'm going to be welding. So I think one of the things that's part of the alignment process is we need to explain it to them and make sure that we get the point across and be able to give them examples of where they need it from the professional level.
Right.
You know, we're the ones that are actually giving them the role to follow.
Right.
And we need to make sure that we can explain it to them why they need to have those courses.
Sorry, what was your name?
John.
John. What John's describing is, it's partly, isn't it, didn't you get that flavour that this is something that's going on on a regular basis and is continuing? So the question at looking at overall from a focus point of view is, do we need that as a component because it's already going on? And it relates back, John, to my discussion about social relationships and connectedness, and there's good things happening.
And I think it would be communication then.
Yeah. I don't like the word communication because it hides, it globs everything together, and you need to be more specific. But certainly as an element of student alignment, and I'm making a teaching point of what you're saying rather than putting to one side what you said to me, obviously. Now, are there any others? Okay. Now, here you have some candidates. This is the givens, okay? So here we're going to be asking Ken particularly, what does he mean by collaboration? Because there seems to be integrated teamwork, for example, would seem to be synonymous or the same as collaboration. And it's very important early to have a conversation that Ken might mean something totally different. Because collaboration is a very big area. What we're trying to do is get focus on alignment. We don't need a lot of things because we're all busy people, and as John has pointed out, there's some good things happening anyway. There's got to be, right? Which is explaining the context of English in a manual or technical skill, whatever you call it. The job that we will be engaging, Ken's going to comment on, is how do we take this list and boil it down to somewhere between 5 and 9 components. A lot of experience of why I say that number, it's not just pulled out of thin air. As a behavioural researcher, there's some very good reasons why below 5 tends to be not as useful, and 9 is just too many. And ideally, from the psychology of learning point of view, we want somewhere between 5 and 7, but life isn't always straightforward. Okay? So there's a task here to define these, okay? But the next task, you're actually going to be using those to go to the next level. So task 1 after this is how do we flesh out, define, and get really clear about the components we need to align on. And one suggestion I have is you ban the word communication. Because it's not very helpful to talk about we need to communicate better, right?
But how can you say that? I want to have
because
a meeting.
I'm in control of this session.
I want to have a meeting with Ken. I go in there and sit in his office and look at him for 5 minutes and not communicate.
But your eyes say it out
That's a
loud.
rather capricious interpretation of what I said.
I mean, you have
Sorry,
to
I'm being
communicate.
playful this morning. It's me just stimulating the environment to say when we talk about communication, what do we mean, rather than talk about generalities, because generalities aren't going to help us.
It's like when I asked my class at the beginning, you know, what are some things you can do to be successful in this class? And they say, study. Yeah, what's that mean? You know, so being more specific, I think, is just what we need to try to do with that word.
Specificity has its benefits. The reason, and I'll build on that point as I come into the next part of the session and bring the screen down. So, okay, so hold those in mind because you're going to be using those in a minute. And you're going to use these components to generate some expectations. And that's what these pieces of paper are about. So you're going to have to write, and I'll give you some more briefing in a minute about that. Okay. So that's what typically this is a large construction project. The people who generated this were a similar sized group. There were 35 executives from 17 different companies. Architects, design engineers, contractors, general contractors, you name it, and the owners. That's what they came out with. And they did it because they couldn't see a way forward. They just saw this project was failed. So this, a lot of time was spent in a very short amount of time, but a lot of effort went into saying, is this what we need to be better aligned about? So these words weren't just generality. These words meant something way beyond we could even comprehend. Particularly one thing that surprised me was the emphasis on respectful communication. But basically they'd returned to their professional castles, a bit like Princeton's in Italy, you know. Everyone went back to their town, built the wall a bit higher, you know, and started getting the contract out and saying, over to you, right? So that's where these components come from. They have to be and should be your language. They should have, the enculturation of meaning in language is really important. So this is a very careful consideration, because you're going to work to it. And you'll see how it works, because we're now going to get you to generate expectations against those components. And the first thing to do is, okay, with your component in mind, what do you expect of another person? I would think it's most valuable to do it individually, but if you want to do it as a group, I'm not worried about that. I want at least some expectations for other groups to review anonymously. But certainly change is, you know, what is it I expect you to keep doing? You know, we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's not a revolution. This is tweaking, tuning, those sorts of areas. What is it I want you to start doing? And most importantly, what I want you to stop doing. Right? It's a very important thing about change. And if you remember that bird and the guy sitting in the nest going, don't open your mouth. You know, we've got to find out ways to stop doing something, to release time that we start doing things, and we feel comfortable about being able to keep doing things. And it's about the simplest way of expressing a change. People need to be clear about stop, start, and continue. So that's the first thing, and that's what you will write on the orange piece of paper. So expectations of other people will be on the orange piece of paper. And the reverse, which? Orange? Okay. Would you pass the paper now, please? Thank you. Orange. So that's, and just to remind yourself, put MEO. MEO is my expectations of others, just to remind you. And then we're going to use the pink paper for OEM, others' expectations of me. So how do I know I'm actually meeting your expectation? If I can't measure it, if we can't agree measurement, then that's not going to help. The other thing is, it's agreed. So we can't do that right now, but the important about these expectations is, it's not just for somebody to sit there and throw an expectation at somebody and say, that's what I expect of you. It doesn't do anything. But it has to be agreed, and we'll talk about how that agreement's reached later on. The other thing is realistic. You know, is it realistic to expect Bill to, you know, fill in the blank? And so realistic is a good judgment. Timed. You know, when do you want it by? All these people that you have expectations of are busy, right? So how do we time it? And how do we prioritize it? The other thing is ethical. It's really to reduce the risk of doing something that nobody feels comfortable with. You remember on the iceberg earlier on we talked about values and beliefs, and people, sometimes expectations get close to not feeling right, okay? And that's always a good check in the process. The other thing is, as Ken will be talking about, it's important that it's recorded. And it's recorded so that you can change it and replace and replicate it. One of the great things about expectations is they last a real long time. So expectations that are here now could last 15 years. You know, if it comes to integrated teamwork, people working together, you know that no matter what the technology or what's going to happen, that's going to be an important component. So having these expectations so that when you introduce a new colleague and they say, well, how does it work around here? Well, I said, well, this is the expectations we've agreed with other departments. This is how we work. And of course, it's a lot better than that individual having to stumble around the culture to find out where the sensitivities are. It's basically saying, look, you know, that's one of the things that probably one of the nicest experiences I had was a lady called Francine Dixterheis, who worked for the Royal Bank. She was taking over a customer service division of 400 people, and I worked with her to get out her expectations out and what she thought was expected. And we put them down on a screen, and she said, oh, by the way, can you help my assistant Dorothy to prepare a presentation? And I just looked at her and went, can Dorothy cut and paste? She'd done it. These expectations, she then went to all these new different departments and things like that and said, okay, I'm new, this is what I expect of you, this is what I think you expect of me, did I get it right? And of course, she immediately got into building relationships which were transparent, and also she found out where people disagreed with her before the little rubber meets the road when a task or something didn't get completed on time, for example. So it's very useful. So SMARTER is a way of looking at these expectations. If you haven't used it before, in your groups, look at the expectations and say, does it meet these criteria? And I'll be asking for commentary on that in a minute. So have 5 minutes discussion in your groups. Do these expectations in front of you meet these criteria? If they do, how? If they don't, why not? What's missing?
Okay, so
Did you see that a few hands put up nice at the SMART acronym? Does that surprise you, or is it just people not having their hand up?
I'll be right back. Mine are all sharp, and this is what.
Okay.
Never gone to conferences, don't want to petition.
This makes it even more useful. That you've got a common language about it.
And I say, I think proposing this sort of idea to help us change and become better. I mean, I talked about this almost at every meeting I had, and from the very first activity I did about collaboration, clarification. This is now about, and I mean at the end, just leave me 5 minutes to give my
Yeah, you want to give your reflections
because it's all come together, you know.
Good.
Like a nursing.
Yeah. It's always one of those things that's been around a long time, but if you've never heard of it, it makes a lot of sense. Practical,
Yeah, see, that was the point, wasn't it? How about don't be a jackass? Pretty specific, maybe. That's the same, right?
Just like on when I was saying, employing common sense. What is common sense? We think we know what common sense is. I guess depended upon what education, whatever common sense means. You know, so
Angela said, oh, why didn't you show us the SMARTER acronym beforehand?
Yes.
And I went, oh, no. Now, why did I do that?
So we would have something.
Pardon?
So we would have something to discuss.
well, to see if our
Evaluate, you know. We learn better, I think, from mistakes.
Yeah, why did I do it? Because that is a valid reason, but it's not why I did it this way.
Well, to shows that are,
Go
to
ahead.
shows that perhaps are not realistic.
That's one thing.
Perhaps we are making our expectations in a constructive enough way to even be met in the first place.
The reason I did it was to show you where you are now and to give you some idea of where you would want to go to with generating expectation. It's very easy, and don't take this the wrong way. Every session I do like this, there's people shaking their heads going, I'm not clear, I'm not clear. I've had executives start a meeting at this chair, and if they had enough space, they'd go back and they'd be 6 feet away, head in hands. A guy called Jazz going, I'm not clear, I'm not clear. And he was head of quality. So this whole idea of what a good expectation is a journey. What I'm trying to establish for you is what you normally do and where smarter or some idea like that might take you to being more specific and therefore what value you get from it. So that's the way we do it. Okay, so let's have somebody read an expectation out and let's get some other comments on it. Who wants to start?
Increased team integration.
Increase team integration, and this is an expectation of other people.
Others expect expectations of them.
This is what people think. And could you repeat it, please? So
Increased team integration.
Increased team integration is an expectation, right? In other groups, what do you think of that?
It's not specific.
Good,
it's
bad,
not
Measurable.
Vague.
You can't tell how you're doing with it.
Not easy to measure.
It's not realistic. Just kidding.
You said it. Yeah, not time-based, okay. Okay, let's hear another one. Would you like to read one out, please?
I expect that a faculty member teaching the same course as I am will meet the same course objectives.
Okay.
Ooh, I like
What's
that
different
one.
about that one from the first one? More specific, okay. What do you think of it as an expectation?
It's reasonable.
I
I think it's reasonable.
It sounds reasonable, realistic, so we're meeting one criteria.
It may not be agreed upon.
It could be measurable.
It could be measured, yes, because there are...
It may not be agreed upon.
Well, we'll come to agreed upon in a little while, but certainly it's got the basis for a good discussion, hasn't it? You know, that will be good. What else do you think about that?
Seems ethical, you give the same treatment to two groups.
It's got an ethical feel to it for Bill, which is good, okay. Let's have another one. Brian, what have you got?
Someone you wrote that, trying to find something that's
Just read it out.
working closely with students to best prepare them to continue their education. This was an expectation of the meetings.
Okay. Could you repeat it so people...
Working closely with students to best prepare them to continue their education.
Okay. Comment on that?
Broad.
How does it stack up against the first two? Is it better than the first one, better than the second, or
Kind of like the first
in the
one.
middle? In the middle, got specificity but not enough. Okay. Dawn, from your colleagues, what have you got?
Said start doing for their expectations of themselves, setting an example of humility or being a servant.
Setting an example of humility and to be of service?
To be a servant.
To be a servant, okay. Okay, so how do we rate that?
What? That's their expectation of...
It's ethical.
It's very ethical.
Very ethical.
Just stop.
I might disagree with that.
Start doing it.
Why would you disagree with it?
Because we're not martyrs.
We're not martyrs, okay.
Is that their expectation of others?
So there's two sides of a coin going on. I would like to render under Caesar
Okay.
that which is Caesar, but we won't get complicated.
That's what they want someone else to do.
What else do you think? To be humble and to be the leader as servant.
I don't think it's specific enough.
Not specific enough. Hard to measure.
It's not a good expectation.
Say again, please.
It's not a good expectation.
Not a good expectation. The intention's good though, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. We're not disagreeing with somebody's desire to have humility, which is good. But it's not passing a number of other tests. Very ethical. We would all like to have that as one of our tenets of conducting our whole life. But okay, so we've got that. Any other comments on that one? I had a client once called Ken. Ken ran a steel fabrication plant, and I was resonating with Ken talking about welders and how difficult the welders are to find. But Ken was a very strong Christian Reform leader. He was a Christian man. And he said to me, "You know what worries me the most?" I said, "What's that?" He said, "You know, when I'm trying to get out of running this organization, I want to make sure it's run on Judeo-Christian lines." About 2 hours later, we unpacked that to something that would meet this sort of test. So that sort of, you hear something ethical, you think that's well, it's well-intentioned. Now, how do I help that colleague say, okay, and even from their own point of view, because busy people will give themselves very unrealistic expectations on occasion, so you need to bring it down to some practicality to help them. And we'll talk about helping the person who originates an expectation later on. Okay, let's have another one. What about Larry's group? We've got one more. Would you like to read one out?
Okay, this is the expectation that someone would have of others. And it's keep performing the duties outlined in the job description.
Okay, keep performing the duties outlined in the job description. What do you think of that?
That's probably agreed.
That's probably agreed upon. It's a contract of employment. Yeah.
It's really measurable.
It's probably measurable.
I don't know the quality of your job description. I'll take that. But some are not.
It's realistic.
Job description.
It's an interesting one because what is the difference? Here's an important question. What's the difference between aligned expectations and job descriptions?
Job descriptions are vague.
Speak up, please.
Job descriptions are vague.
Job descriptions are vague.
They're one-sided. I mean, that's your expectation
They're
of me, but I
one-sided.
may or may not agree with it.
They always end.
Good one. Yeah.
They always end with "and other duties as assigned."
That's the part I don't agree with.
For those that are interested, I rewrote a case study called the Three Frigates. Does everyone know what a frigate is? Frigates. It's a naval warship, a small naval warship. And it was a beautiful study done by John Machin, and that's a long history, but essentially he took 3 identical frigates. They were identical in every way because they had the same command structure, the same number of personnel, the same guns, everything, and he then went into why one performed better than another. And it turned out that it was nothing to do with job descriptions, it was the fact that they were aligned with the people who supplied them. So when they came into the port, because they were respectful of the people loading their ship, they got the best. You know, when you're out at sea for 3 months, vegetables and good food become quite important, and they could do that, and that's one of the reasons they perform better. So, job descriptions are very interesting. In the engineering profession, they go into, they're like a tome, they're that thick. And somebody said to me once, said, "Yeah, I haven't been on a project yet where I've even touched 25% of my job description." So they are useful, don't get me wrong, I'm not decrying, job descriptions are useful for organizational design, being fair, and things like that. They have their own purpose, but to actually look at alignment and improve performance, they're not that useful. Right? Let's have another one. Who's got one that they would like to read out?
This one is interesting. Stop sharing information intended for communication between 2 parties with third parties. This eliminates the trust of open door policies being preached around campus. Basically, don't air your dirty laundry on the internet and don't gossip. My interpretation.
That's your interpretation. Could you read it out, Bill? Because I don't know whether the other end of the room.
Stop sharing information, i.e. emails, intended for the communication between 2 parties with third parties. This eliminates trust of open door policies being preached around campus.
Okay.
In other words, correlating it to something.
So how does it meet the SMARTer criteria? And listen to that facilitation change because it's important. How does it meet the SMARTer criteria?
Specific.
It's what?
It's specific.
It's specific. It's certainly measurable. So say again?
You could count the number of times
You could count the number of times that happened, and you could certainly report on it, so it's got that.
Realistic.
Pardon?
Realistic.
Realistic, yes, it's something we all do every day, and it's certainly practical to think about actually how many people we copy.
It's ethical.
It's ethical. Okay, so you notice how I changed that, because I did it deliberately, because the last piece of the expectation was very much a value judgment on the expectation, and I took you deliberately back to the criteria for a reason. This is the objectification of expectation. We're trying to get away from those value-laden comments which can offend, and we're trying to get something that's, okay, I don't have to like you to work with you, but I certainly have to respect, and you respect me, so we can get work done. And that's why this is very useful, to just step away from something that's emotive and very much felt by the writer, to something that, okay, how can we make that practical? So it's respecting the individual's feelings, but it's trying to take the value-laden judgments out of the expectation. And then therefore it becomes more practical, and it helps strengthen the culture about what it is to be respectful. So that's a really important point for expectations. Another one.
Well, more than what this person wrote, I just happen to notice that my writing on my pink one is the same as Karen's on her orange. And even what's more important than what they wrote is the fact that what they expected of others and what others expected of them, they have the same thing. So they expect others to treat them the way they treat others. One of them was initiating communication and exchange of info and new ideas, and they expect others to do that, and that's an expectation of them.
Yeah. Be as you would wish to be done by, or the source. What source for the goose is source for the gander. Yeah, there's often a reciprocal, and the fact that the person generating the expectation has that reciprocal is very important when they share it with the individual they want to gain agreement from, because it seems to be a very balanced way of approaching communication. And that has a lot of merit when you're particularly trying to do things differently, and you're saying, I expect this of myself. It's a good position to keep a conversation moving positively. Any other examples? There are many others, yes? Okay, now I'm now going to change and say, okay, what are you learning from this process? So I won't pick on anyone. What's coming through for you and your colleagues as you work on these expectations?
These expectations, or what I'm picking up from SMART as what should be in the communication, in the expression of an expectation. It reminds me very much of creating measurable objectives, which has been around for a very long time.
Yeah.
So.
Which is true.
Okay.
And so what's your learning from that?
Well, I'm learning that we need to remember the idea of letting people know what objectives are.
Right.
And agree on what the objectives are.
Yeah. So yes, if you layered it from sort of job description to objectives for a particular year, you then come down to expectations to meet that objective. Sometimes people find that a useful structure. Other things that are very relational don't relate to a specific task, because normally objectives are related to tasks and priorities and things like that.
And I guess it would raise a question, is if some of these things are supposed to be relational and not necessarily totally objective with a job objective, then how, I have to ask the question, how do you create an objective that's relational, an expectation that's relational, that meets all those criteria?
First comment is there's nothing about perfection. We're trying to use a basis for objectifying a conversation. Because if somebody has if we have an expectation of somebody, and it is of the class that you describe, which is, some people would say soft. I don't like to like the word, but the soft skills side of work. Then certainly we need to work with that individual, because they might say, yeah, I think I agree with you, but how are you going to measure me? You know, it would be like somebody is a bit short-tempered, and they have a short fuse, and they apologize, and you then have to unpack that another level and say, okay, I expect you, if you're feeling frustrated, to do the following, and therefore you have to get down into specifics about mechanisms which blow the fuse earlier and not in front of people, rather than blowing the fuse actually face to face, because that can be a very damaging thing for relationships to do. And certainly it bends the mind to say, how the heck? It's important. You know, you've heard today colleagues say about integrated teamwork, collaboration, briefing, and things like that. This is obvious. These are obviously important issues for you. So we join the battle of saying, how on earth do we put them into something practical? That's agreed. And I'm not suggesting it's easy.
No.
No. But it's important, because your colleagues are talking about this stuff. What else are you learning about this? What in your conversation, when you read these expectations together, what was the conversation about?
Little things are bothersome.
Sorry?
Little things are bothersome.
Little things are bothersome. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Some people would say don't sweat the small stuff, but it really is important. There are certain things that are very sensitive to people, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I mean, for different reasons, people have different levels of sensitivity to certain subjects. It's being respectful about that that's important. Another point.
I have I'm learning that, like, if a student had an issue with me or a colleague did, I shouldn't become defensive, and other people should not become defensive, because it's not personal. It has to do with some sort of violation with what they're feeling about these things.
Mm-hmm.
They're not seeing it as rational, realistic. They have issue with the specificity, something along those lines. So before you respond or become reactive, consider what their issue is. Is it an ethical issue?
Right.
And ask that, really talk to the student and say, what do you perceive?
What's your name?
My name's Amanda.
Amanda, sorry. Amanda's talking about things when things get tense. There's an issue of disagreement. The first thing that I would recommend is, by having conversations about expectations, about how we handle conflict before it occurs, is probably not a bad thing to do. Can't always do it, but certainly we can prevent some of the more obvious stuff occurring. And talking about how we resolve a conflict can be very useful. If in your experience that's an area that will crop up during the year, say with your students, for example.
We have something with our students that we give in the very first day. They get points for each of their expectations.
Right.
So there's no fine line of what our expectations are.
Okay, so you have a list of expectations, much like a Francine example.
100 points, it's worth 100 points.
Okay, right.
And that's a third grade.
Okay, so with the list. Now, how do you get their expectations?
We take points out.
And so that's something we've written down.
Good. Yeah, that's good learning.
No, sorry.
Okay. We could do Zumba.
I'm turning around a little bit.
I'll watch. Okay. What else? What else is coming through from reading these expectations and the conversation you've been having?
That having a conversation about expectations seems perhaps to start at the vagaries little, and perhaps bringing up things that they have learned that
trying to, you know, how could this be made more specific or whatnot, asking those questions about just discussing the expectation can lead to very simple solutions right there, to where it doesn't have to be a big issue. It's just like, oh, okay, I see where this issue is, and this is, can be a very easy solution. And so,
No, they don't have to be difficult. I think going back to John's point, sometimes this small stuff really does have a sensitivity which other people don't have. That's fine. We're all different. But certainly bringing it out in the open and seeing below the waterline, seeing somebody just not at the task level, but their experience, for example. Their experience will shape how they look at problems, and understanding that they have a different lens that they look at the problem from you can help understand where the tensions come in a relationship.
The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People from Stephen Covey's that's exactly how he starts out. What is little ride in the subway?
Yeah, that's a useful framework to have conversations like this, certainly. And getting below the waterline, for example, let's take the idea of consistency, that one person in one location is delivering the same curriculum to the same objectives. What do we mean by consistency? Because we're all dealing with different learners, right? You know, what's happening to your population is probably happening like many other community colleges. The age span in the classroom is getting wider. They're coming to college for different reasons. And so obviously as you cope with that diversity of learner, then consistency is a very valid topic to keep talking about. So that consistency of curriculum delivery and outcomes is an ongoing process, not a defined event at the start of each year. Because you're going to find out things about your students. You're going to say, okay, this seems to be a reasonable option. How do you see it from a consistency point of view? And he said, yeah, you can take that and come around back on track. And we get consistency that way. Okay, so you've got expectations of, my expectations of others. Who found it more difficult to write down others' expectations of me? What you thought was expected of me? Did anyone experience that problem? John did? Yeah. You'd be in a good group of people where, you know, if you start having difficulty in that direction, that's also a flag to say, I really need to talk. Because the first problem is, I can't think of any, means go and have a conversation. Because there are people who will have expectations of you that you might not agree with. So there's nothing worse than when you get that reaction. What's wrong with her or what's wrong with him? And you suddenly find out, well, I'm not a mind reader. So if you have a sense of that it's been more difficult in that direction, that's also another cue that you might want to be talking to people about expectations. Here is the process, right? It's been worked out probably over more than 15 years, but it's a really important process to bear in mind when you look at the alignment. Because by writing down expectations, we are not aligned, right? We realize we put some ammunition in the gun and we're going to fire it now, right? So the first thing to do, and this sounds banal, but it's so important, the expectation originator starts. So if you wrote an expectation today and you don't know whether the individual you're aiming it at or the group you're aiming at, you don't know what their response would be, you have the responsibility. Right? So the expectation originator, and they could be, my expectations of this group are, or I think this group expects me to. Doesn't matter. You have the responsibility to originate the conversation. You're starting. Okay? The next thing is, you now need to have a conversation that says, are we going to agree this? Are we going to discard it? Or are we going to disagree? Commonly, disagreements occur when somebody says, if I did that for John, I couldn't do it for Tricia. I don't have the resources. We have a resource problem. And that's when unresolved expectations are very useful to take it to a divisional head or to take it to Ken to say, we have this issue. Yes, love to be able to do it for you, Amanda, but can't do it for Bill at the same time. So there's disagreement is good. Discard is really useful because, oh, I didn't realize. You don't need to do that for me. That's fine. You know, I understand it's great, but you don't need to do it. Great, we can take it off the table. Because how many times have you been in work and here in the college? That's a nice distinction, wasn't it? But never mind, not intended. When you suddenly realise somebody's doing all this work, what are you doing now? Well, we always used to do that. It's the famous example of the quality expert reviewing all the quality report sheets, and he kept seeing in the top right-hand corner this box, he couldn't read it. So eventually he went back into the stock room and found the original hard copy masters, and the top right-hand corner said, number of air raids today. A lot of work could be wasted. It was relevant at the time. If you were reporting productivity, you had an air raid in the Second World War, but for Upper Peninsula today, it's probably not as relevant. It doesn't need to go. The other thing is, when you agree, make sure let your yes be yes and let your no be no. There's nothing worse than feeling that you are just to be nice, or disagreement is a very good thing for any number of reasons about communication. So by all means, when you agree, great, you're now going to do some more work. When you agree, you're now going to do the next piece of work. The receiver, now the responsibility is shifted. The receiver details the evidence. Evidence is an objective bystander could observe this and measure the expectation. It's just as the name suggests. Evidence is objective of what will and what will not be delivered. The rubber is really meeting the road now where we're getting closer to alignment, right? So, you know, I agree to share ideas. Fine. How, when, what? How am I going to, you're agreeing to it, you're agreeing to be part of a team, to collaborate or whatever. We better know what evidence we're going to be judging you by. And that you wish to be judged by. Right? The other thing is the originator then assesses the receiver's need for help. Just because you've originated an expectation and somebody else has agreed to it does not let you off the hook. Because that person may be not have done the task before or expectation. They may be having difficulty like feeling nervous, they're taking a risk and these sorts of things. You, the expectation originator, are there to help them. What alignment's about, isn't it? So I'll sit in one of your classes, you know, and I'll observe you, and then afterwards I'll give you some comments, or whatever it is, but you get the idea. You've originated something that you think is important. We're not generating things that are not important, incidental, are already not an issue. This is important stuff that you, the expectation originator, have written down and are engaging the receiver for that. Then the originator provides help and support. When that process occurs, you can safely say you are aligned on that expectation. That's what alignment means. Back to your question earlier on. What is alignment? That's alignment. Now, how bad can it get? Well, here you'll have a group of people, and this is what you can do with the data, and I'm just going to show you 2 or 3 samples of how you can measure performance and how it raises issues before they become really big problems. As you notice, this is a matrix, and if you'll notice on the rows and the columns, you have the gentleman's name, Cliff, for example, appearing twice. And if you look back, if you remember back to that matrix I showed you, remember the Tom and Cliff? Here we can see Tom has 13 expectations and Cliff thinks he has 12. So the MEOs you read this way and the OEMs you read that way. 13, 12, there's the 22.4 you saw earlier. So there's Cliff with 22 expectations and Tom only thinks there are 4. Warning flag immediately, right? Next thing here is you notice there's 2 people in this group called Dan and Mike, and they have expectations, 65 expectations of members of their group, their colleagues, and Mike likewise has 49. But you notice the numbers below them are very low. Warning. These 2 gentlemen were responsible for designing the actual hospitals. These were the chief architects of 2 architectural firms.
They don't think people expecting from them?
Yeah, there is a context to that, and this is a group in transition because Mike had just been brought in. But the interesting thing is Dan had been around a long time, so why was the gap so big? I mean, it's going to occasion a conversation, isn't it? Even if we find out that whatever, but you can't let that go on. Now, Tom is the actual representative of the owner, so he is the leader of this group. And if you notice along here, you'll see his expectations of other people, 13, 13, 7, 7, 7. They're running pretty close, aren't they? People think that this is what Tom expects, 12, 9, 4, 5, 6, right? So that looks okay. But like the Cliff and Tom matrix we showed you, this doesn't look okay. So there are people like Cliff and Dan and Grant who have a lot of expectations, 22, 25, 26, and Tom only thinks there are 4 and 5. This group was in conflict, and this is one of the reasons behind it. Yeah, the outlier, of course, is Larry. If you notice, Larry there is 6 and 5. That's because Larry and Tom had worked together for 4 years, and Larry was his head of finance. The others were representatives of the architectural firm and the general contractors. This is a group that's not going to go very far without serious problems because you've got so much misalignment. Here's an example from BYU, Idaho, where the VP, in a similar role to Ken's, was changing strategy. And so this is quite common to see that his expectations of his faculty are the blue shape. And for different reasons, he wanted more business development. So that's why you can see on the north axis there that he had more expectations than his faculty thought that were required. In terms of leadership, he had different expectations so that he was using resources better, and you particularly see phased competency development. Junior members in the faculty were being developed. And you see the red shape is what the faculty thought Grant expected of it. Now that's a very useful diagram to then sit down and say, okay, this is what the change of strategy means. I'm expecting different things. This wasn't beating anybody up. This was just saying, this is what I mean by a change of direction. And if you get clear expectations like that, it's a very useful way of saying, oh, that's what you mean, right? So this data can be used in a number of ways, and it also is useful to track misalignment. And these are the last 2 slides I'll show you of data, but it just gives you a flavor of what you can do when you start collecting data. Here are the components along the horizontal axis that we saw earlier defined when we were looking at component definition. You'll notice that we have a way of looking at the amount of agreement. So where expectations are agreed, that's the red bar, and the mauve bar is what is either yet to be discussed or in disagreement with. And that was in the August of the year that we started the work. By January, that was the picture. So what you think may not be measurable is actually measurable. What Ken and you need to decide is what you need to measure and the extent to which you're going. But expectations data like this ultimately can be, we've developed a web-based application. And I'm only suggesting that you have many communication channels here, and it may be how far down this route is it going to be useful to do it. The first simple thing would be, I'm going to do it with all my students, and I'm going to let you know what the result is, Ken, right? Because as educators, we have all sorts of responsibilities, but my primary role here today is to say that alignment skills are life skills for these people who are going to go through many job changes, even career changes. And that if they don't align with people that they come into contact with quickly, they can make mistakes, they can step on a cultural landmine, and they get fired for no fault of their own. I mean, I'm not dramatizing to make a point, actually, just this is the way we do it round here. It's something you don't want to be said to you as you walk out the door. It's something that you want a clear picture of when you start with that particular employer. And that's really where we have it. And so we have the ability to have assurance through alignment and expectations. Assurance that what we're trying to do will stand a very good chance of success. And that's its first and primary benefit. The other thing is agility. Because we are clearer, we can move quicker. For example, we have a set of expectations and a change comes about, like we get a big grant or something that we didn't plan, or we require a building. Right? Immediately, because more people are conscious of expectations, alignment can be done quicker, we can move resources better. Productivity increases because we're not doing work that people don't want us to do, for example. We're competitive because we're producing better results. We can compete with other sources of education, be it online or whatever it is. We, in this college, still compete. We compete for mind share amongst anything else. And because we've gone through this process, it is repeatable. So when we get to 13, 14 academic year, guess what? We're still going to be using many of the expectations we worked on in this semester. So it is useful, and therefore the benefit of that expectation alignment keeps on giving back in a very positive way. Thank you very
much. So Nick's kind of handing it over to me. I'm going to take 1 minute or two. You know, in effect, lunch is being set up now, so I know I'm all that's between that. But, this sort of idea started in my head 3 years ago. Obviously, everybody knows what I did before I got here, and then I came here. And some of you may remember 3 years ago the activity that we did. It involved some islands and blindfolding. And, you know, some people were like, what the hell is this? And some people said, this is ridiculous. Some people said, that was really cool. Some people have used it in their classes. I've since done that activity on my own 24 times in different organizations, as well as with a family recently who asked me to do something. There was a lot of issues. Can you imagine going to a family reunion and that's the activity you do? But nevertheless, the idea the idea of that was to demonstrate this idea of alignment. If you recall very, very briefly, and maybe it's not that close up front in your mind, but it was about getting everybody on the same page, essentially. And that meant moving people between islands. People that were, blindfolded could represent any number of people or students. People that don't see things the way I see it, misalignment. People who don't hear things the way that I thought I said them. And for me, that's always a lesson as well, but also that was an idea to demonstrate sort of my leadership style. And obviously, as islands have sort of come together, continue to drift apart, settled in certain spots, I think there's been some amazing progress. On that note, we jump forward several years, and here we are. And although I started to talk to Nick a little bit about this idea about a year ago, it came together with me saying, we're now at a point where I think people need to have the conversation about expectations. It's perfectly aligned with our strategic planning initiative that we want to begin this year, with some of the work, coincidentally, that happened at Sequin, and some of the things that we as a team...
Ken, there might be a car on fire out of parking.
I'm sorry?
Oh, right, okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
It's a car.
It's smoking more and more.
No, I think it might be a... Is there an ambulance there?
Maybe the grilling or something.
Just get them
Yeah.
Someone's on the phone right there calling somebody.
Okay.
It's not my car, I'm surprised.
As long as it's not your car, we'll...
Does anybody need to move their car?
My car is behind there, and my car burns up all cash and damage. I park it under trees here. I should go park, that's another windstorm, I put it under the tree.
Not to interrupt, but I think there's a car.
Yeah. That's probably one of the better interruptions I've heard. Yes, that's really good.
And we're all gonna leave.
The automotive guys are going to go and sort of...
Jim's just gonna skip. Someone's on a cell phone. Oh, it's Kathy's. I should go to Like I said, I'd like to go move.
I'd like to get mine closer to.
Oh, people are moving away. Smoke skinny. All right, well, let me go back.
At least it didn't upstage your presentation. Nice job, I really enjoyed it.
Good, thank you.
I talked to Ken. That's one of the things I like. Doing his gourmet cooking. I'd like to have you guys over on Thursday night. Yeah, good. Any food things that you don't like, or
Not particularly. I cook aluminium food, but I also do like things like roast lamb or whatever.
because I know like Ken doesn't eat beef or pork.
Oh, that's fine.
So I don't know.
Oh, somebody had a fan.
Ken's car was a little close, so I thought
That'd be why they're smelling it so strong.
So you like cooking yourself, huh?
Yeah, I do. I cook tandoori chicken for 150 people. I've adapted the recipe so that people who have done their food before like it.
This went out with 2 more fire extinguishers.
Just cutting the chilies out, just playing around with some of the spices. Just to, that was done cold on a bed of ice and an Indian But brasses are really It worked really well.
One of the things that's interesting about hospitality, Priest brought it up at the last, he said, you know, it's nice when someone takes you to dinner, he said, but when someone has you to your home, he said it's another different thing. He said it's opening yourself as that, you're cooking, you're inviting them into your world, and it means a lot more.
The fire engine people are on the way. I'll wrap up even though some people have left, and that's totally cool. But yeah, so, and there's other cars around, but we're not going to worry about it. One of the things that I'm going to do, I'll recap this in a follow-up, is, I'm going to be meeting with the division chairs a couple of times this year. A couple of those meetings will be mostly dedicated to spring schedule, but one of the things I'd like to do is revisit some of the things that have been written here. I'm going to have all of this. I want people to look at this stuff. I'd also like to be invited, and I'm just kind of throwing that out there as an idea, to be invited to, if you have a division meeting or two during the semester, then maybe this is on the agenda at one point. I think it's important to continue this discussion. The other thing is I'll work with Nick, and he can join via Skype. He could join discussions this week. I mean, he's literally around all week. We've got a pretty full day tomorrow, but Thursday's open for him, and then Friday morning. But if you're having a division meeting, it might be good to sort of, hey, here's some expectations we have within our division, or whatnot, and maybe he could help facilitate that discussion. He's just offering that as something he can do to help. But my point of that whole example of the islands is now we're here where really my goal this year is to be sure that we're clear on things, even more so than we've tried to establish in the past, and to be sure that we're all on that same island. They're all working towards the same thing, even though there's going to be ups and downs with that. So with that being said, I mean, I'm not going to try to hold your attention anymore, but thank you, thank Nick. I don't want an explosion to happen. But thanks everyone. What a way to start the year with a fire. So, thank you, Nick.
Right in front of you, there is a fire underneath.
Yeah, so you're...
I can't go there.
No, I wouldn't recommend going there.
Anybody else that's a little foolish?
Somebody's got a fire right underneath
Oh, give me a break. You don't like my purple truck?
So how'd you lose all your weight, Brian?
Weight Watchers.
Really? Great.
That's a sign.
I won't bug you, because if I can accommodate it, I certainly will.
Okay, but let me know if you're stuck,
I might have this one welding guy who's only got, a little time on a Wednesday free as far as, I haven't talked with him yet.
Right, true, right.
Okay.
Let me know, Connie.
I want to talk about your iPad. I want to get one. I wanted so much to get one this summer. So, anyway, yeah.
Maya has an iPad. She'll be coming to school with it. Yeah, and I will sign that. Yeah, because obviously, because I don't have guardianship yet. We're in the process because she needs me to be in charge of everything. But I'll sign the back and forth gabbing. We'll do the legal if they ever do an audit or whatever. Right. Yeah, I will do that.
Like if
because and you will. I just know.
Look forward to it.
Oh, and she's looking forward.
Did she register yet?
Tomorrow she does.
Yeah, because like I said, I didn't see her on there.
Yeah, so she just got her letter yesterday, and so she'll be registering, coming to that orientation.
Okay.
So.
And actually, I think I told you, it'll be anytime Monday through Thursday. It's going to be somewhere between 1 and 3, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, because I've got a physics lab.
Okay, so it'll be Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday.
Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Monday, Tuesday,
we'll take out some time.
Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday.
Yeah,
okay.
I think that would be
and she's with DVR, so she hasn't even started her job yet, so that'll be good. We can get her class figured out, and then
we'll see kind of where she lands.
Yeah.
My big thing right now is, I think, my time factor. I totally love doing it. Thinking, am I going to have, is there going to be enough time, we do 3 credits, 3 hours, to really do, I think about that at all the students when I start these 901 but is there going to be enough time for me to really give them the oomph that I need to? That really bothers me, even though
And Connie, she'll probably take it again. She'll probably take it both semesters.
We'll just take it however we have to.
Yeah,
and so enjoy the learning and whatever I have to do.
Yeah, and that's sort of why she's.
I totally love those classes.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad you're here.
It's time to do them.
Yeah.
And there are only so many hours a day.
No.
And when I really in the morning, I get up and I'm up here in a 9 o'clock. I'm in class every hour with my strength and terror, my tech physics, and then in the English 095. And then in the afternoons, I used to have 2 other classes, and I'd still work everybody out. And now I'm just my But those classes tend to sometimes start energizing me. I totally enjoy working.
Oh, and she's looking forward to it. Even though she has no idea what to expect, neither do I, because I've been. And that's one reason.
See where she's at.
Yeah.
I don't know her. I have to just see where she's at.
Right, and it probably will take one whole semester to do that with her. And then she'll probably take it again next semester. There is a fire. Oh dear, where is that?
Oh yeah, it's probably the gas can.
dear. There's Jim. Here we go. Here's the fire department. Amen.
I bet it's even the fact that.
Yeah. gonna say that could probably blow.
Oh, yeah, it's looking serious.
Thank you for your presentation.
One way or another. Sorry, Amanda? I'll come down there, because I need to.
Okay. So Connie, I'll probably see you even
Okay.
tomorrow.
Yeah.
Are you in the
Yeah, I'm down.
registration area?
No, I'm down in my office.
In your office?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
swing
and-
by
and maybe
tomorrow.
see if you can get that, if you can get it signed, or sign it and send her a copy along with me. I'll put it right in the
Definitely
folder
will,
anyway.
yeah, because
Okay.
we'll need to gab,
Yeah,
for
oh,
sure.
you bet.
Mary Grace forgot her glasses, let me take that to her.
Are we all coming back in here?
I don't know. I'm not going to carry all my stuff upstairs.
Gosh, yeah.
Mr. Rainey, what the hell?
Oh my goodness, this is.
Oh my gosh, look at those flames.
Going to the next car?
Well, yeah, whose car?